welcome to the Summer 2020 online class from Alokavihara Forest Monastery and Dhammadipa.com. I would like to begin this Dhamma talk by taking refuge and paying homage to the Buddha and to the Triple Treasure. Namo tassa bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. Our topic for this class is the study of the quality of attention. And in particular, this week, this is the first lecture of 6. So this is week 1, and in particular this week we are studying attention and activity. And before I delve too much into the activity part of it, I would like to talk a little bit about my understanding of the distinction between awareness and attention, because I think that this is an important place for us to start our exploration. So awareness is a kind of knowing. It's a receptive aspect of the mind, of chitta, or we say heart mind, or shin in Japanese and in Chinese. The whole of cognitive experience is the chitta. And awareness is the receptive part of that, or the knowing part of that. And it is an aspect of mind that is present before, during, and after a thought. So sometimes we hear the metaphor that mind is like the sky and thoughts are like the clouds. So in this case, I'm referencing the sky as awareness. And then we have attention. So attention is something which is driven by our intentionality. Attention is something which is more directive and which tends to gravitate toward thought or toward pleasant sensations. This is where the sort of more baseline attraction for attention is, if it's not attended to more skillfully or more intentionally. But it is still something which we have the sense of being able to work with, being able to point our attention in a particular direction. And when we align these two, when we align awareness with attention, then what happens is we are more deeply engaged in our experience. We are present in the moment and present with whatever our object of attention is, in a non-judgmental way and in a way which tends to enhance our ability to remember that experience, to remember our presence with that thing. So in the Theravada and the early Buddhist traditions, this is sometimes the way that we would describe mindfulness, a heightened state of attention and awareness in the moment, without judgment, in a neutral fashion, and in a way that ultimately results in being able to recall the events for which we are present. And a good example of when it's not happening like that, when awareness and attention are not aligned, is, for example, when you arrive at your home, at your place of residence, wherever that might be, an apartment or a room in a shared space, or your house, or any number of other places. You arrive in your residence and you put down the keys as you are walking into the house, and you're thinking about the fact that you're quite thirsty and you want to just walk right over to the refrigerator and get yourself something to drink. But then what happens is you can't find your keys when it's time to leave the house again, because your attention was on the mental aspect of thinking about wanting a beverage, thinking about being thirsty, and moving ahead past that present moment of putting down the keys, and so that the awareness was there. The keys ended up somewhere. They actually did get put down. They didn't stay in your hand or something else. There was enough awareness for the keys to get put down, and yet you don't know where. So the memory of it is also lost because there wasn't enough attention. So I begin us in this class with the study of attention and activity. And you might wonder why I start there, because some folks might say it's harder to pay attention in activity than when things are not busy. But I would suggest that it's a relatively familiar place to start. And as we just saw in that previous example, it can sometimes be easier to notice when there is a gap, when there is a separation between attention and awareness when we are actually doing something. On the cushion at times, there are times when it can be more obvious, but there are also many, many times when it can be much more subtle, and we can suddenly be drawn with our attention quite far away from the present moment for a long period of time before we actually realize that the gap has occurred. And we begin also with Zen teachings, and the reason for that is because Zen has a very strong group of teachings about attention in activity. And this we see in Zen focus on training and rituals. We see a lot of training in attention in the formal meals, for example. They're called the oryoki meals. Somebody once called it dance theater for monastics, and it's a very, very precise way of taking nourishment, taking a meal. And then there is work practice, work as practice, and talking about attention in sort of more mundane activities like gardening and dusting and sweeping. So I'd like to start out with some Zen teachings, and in particular, we're going to look at, I want to look first at the Genjo Koan. So that was given as one of the optional readings for this week. The Genjo Koan as translated by Francis Cook, a very well-respected translator of not a while back, actually. And he translates this title, Genjo Koan, as manifesting absolute reality. Manifesting absolute reality. Or another way that it is sometimes translated is actualizing the fundamental point. So I don't want to get too much into the title. I want to actually point us at a paragraph near the end of this. So Genjo Koan is from Shobogenzo. It's from the Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. And it's written by a Zen master named Eihei Dogen. Eihei Dogen was the founder of Soto Zen, a particular lineage of Zen in which I and many of the folks in this class have practiced for quite a long time. It's Japanese Buddhism, founded by Eihei Dogen in the early part of the 13th century. And so in the paragraph that Francis Cleary entitles Non-Duality of Persons and Dharma, it's on the second page of this translation of the Genjo Koan. Toward the bottom of that paragraph, maybe 2/3 of the way down, it says, being just what they are, if one practice authenticates the Buddha way, then when one understands one thing, one penetrates one thing. When one takes up one practice, one cultivates one practice. Because the place is right here and the place is thoroughly grasped, the reason you do not know the entirety of what is to be known is that this knowing and the total penetration of the Buddha Dharma arise together and practice together. So this is a more theoretical, you could say, or a more general explanation of attention and how attention serves us in our practice. So when one understands one thing, one penetrates one thing. Or I might like to use the word interpenetrates. So my interpretation of this, and this may or may not be Dogen's meaning when he taught it, but my interpretation is that when there is a deep understanding of reality, or we could say a kind of presence which enables us to really be clear about what's happening in body and mind and in the interaction in the environment, then we are penetrating it, or we could say interpenetrating it, meaning we ourselves are also one of the conditions that's present in that moment. So in this case, it's helpful to talk a little bit about contact between the body and the mind and the environment, and we can understand this perhaps a little bit more clearly. So when the Buddha, the way that the Buddha described it was that when there is awareness, when there is a kind of consciousness, receptive consciousness, and there is a sense organ, like the ear, for example, and there is the object that goes with the sense organ, so the sound of my voice, for example, and those three things come together, that is a moment of contact, and it sparks off a kind of ear consciousness. That's how the Buddha described it. So a particular flavor of consciousness arises. And then from that flavor of consciousness, it has a tone, a pleasant, unpleasant, or kind of indeterminate tone. And then we can identify it as a thing, like a voice. And we can have some kind of thoughts about what that thing is and what it means and what we want to do with it or don't want to do with it. So this is a way of understanding our experience using the framework that the Buddha referred to as the 5 khandhas or the 5 skandhas. So I tend to use both the Pali and the Sanskrit terms. So khandhas in Pali, skandhas in Sanskrit. And what this means is that if you notice, when those three things are coming together, it's body and mind and environment all at the same time. Body and mind and environment, non-separate in a moment of contact. So when one understands that thing, right? When there is a perception of that thing, a sensation that reaches the consciousness, that we've penetrated it. It has become part of this threefold moment, this threefold instance of contact. Or the way that quantum theory, and goodness knows I am not an expert in quantum theory, but the tiny bits that I understand is, as it said in quantum theory, to observe the thing is to actually define its state. Its state is more indeterminate until the moment at which we observe it. And then by our observation, by our presence as a condition, as part of what's there, what's going on, then the state becomes more clear and more measurable. And then there is this statement of because the place is right here and the place is thoroughly grasped. The reason you don't know the entirety of what is to be known is that this knowing arises and practices together with the penetration. So this is also very interesting, because what I hear in this statement is Dogen pointing at the way in which the Dharma actually can help us to bring forth, to touch into aspects of our experience that are there already in those moments of contact, in those moments of attention. And yet, if the attention and the awareness aren't aligned well, then we can't actually experience them. We can't capture them well. And so only awareness is there, and attention doesn't actually catch it, because attention is off to something else. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. And some of you have heard this story before. So I apologize for that. But it's one of my favorite teaching stories, and it relates to exactly this, how aspects of experience can become known even when they are already there. So I was part of a group of teachers who was leading a year-long program for non-residents, lay folks who were practicing at San Francisco Zen Center. And we had one larger group, which all the 6 teachers taught, and then each one of us had a smaller cohort of people who were near our geographical area. And so I had about 12 folks in my group, and one of those people was a young, very capable young woman who had been practicing for some period of time, I think around 4 years or so at the time that she was doing this program. And so our first homework assignment for the first month of the 12 months, was that we asked everyone to identify which foot they put in their skirt or kilt or shorts or dress or sarong or whatever other piece of clothing. We asked people to discern which foot they put in their clothes first in the morning, habitually, just to see over a period of time which was the usual one. And this young woman came to me after the first month, so probably halfway into the second month. She came to me really frustrated, and she said, I still have not been able to figure out which foot I put in first. She said, 5 days a week I get in my car to go to work, and I think to myself, oh my gosh, once again, I wasn't there. I don't know. I have no idea which foot went in first. And on the weekends is worse. There's just no way. And so she was a bit flustered about all this, and so we had a conversation about it. We talked a little bit about the energy of habit, for example, that we think that habits actually make our life easier, when in actuality, habits are removing us from our experience. They're distancing us slightly from our experience. And we talked a little bit about slowing down, about the rush of things going on in the morning. She was a mom of a young daughter, a 3-year-old girl. She's also married to a gentleman who had a professional job, and she also had a professional job. So I imagine the household was pretty busy most mornings. So we talked a little bit about slowing down. And we talked very specifically, I mentioned to her the idea of being present for the moment before the moment that you want to observe. So she took all this in and went back at it. And a couple of weeks later, she came back to me as I'm remembering it. A couple of weeks later, she came back and she said, guess what? I figured out which foot I put in first. And I said, great, which foot do you put in first? And she said, I usually put in my left foot. Wonderful, wonderful. You figured it out. You were able to align awareness with attention at that moment that you wanted to observe. And she said, yeah, but that's not the coolest part. So what's the coolest part? The coolest part is that my daughter also puts her left foot in first. Beautiful, beautiful. I was so impressed to hear that she had this additional experience. So once she became aware of her own experience, when she became mindful of her own body and mind in that moment of getting dressed, then she was also able to become more mindful of what was happening at other points in the morning, and in particular, getting her daughter dressed. And so what happens then? There's this beautiful awareness of this being that she loves dearly and she spends time with. And there's perhaps a tiny bit less friction each morning when she hands her daughter the left leg of the shorts first. Or if it changes, then hopefully she's also still practicing her mindfulness and she'll notice, oh, now my daughter's decided that she's going to use her right foot more often. And you learn something about each other. So in this way, this activity that she was doing for herself, getting dressed, right? She was aware enough to get her clothes on and get out the door every day. Certainly there was enough awareness, but the attention wasn't there. The attention wasn't there until she made the effort and she brought the intention, the directedness of mind to the situation, to the thing that she wanted to observe. And then this beautiful other teaching also arose, which had always been there. It had always been there because she had been dressing her daughter all this time. But again, the attention wasn't quite aligned enough until that moment when she was able to do it. So the practice will show us how the knowing and the total penetration arise together and practice together. The knowing and the total penetration and the knowing and the total penetration arise together and practice together. It's revealed in that moment. So this is the more general way of speaking about it. Dogen also had some more specific ways of speaking about it, and that's our primary reading for this week. So I gave you a suggestion of reading the Tenzo Kyokun, that's the instructions to the cook. The particular version that I'm using, I think it's the same one that you have, is a translation by Taigen Dan Layton, Reverend, Venerable Taigen Dan Layden, and it's from this text called Dogen's Pure Standards for the Zen Community. And right, how much more mundane an activity could you practice with than cooking? Right? It's something that lots and lots and lots of human beings do, and do regularly. And I imagine that Dogen in particular would have wanted to give this teaching to his students, his disciples, in part because they didn't appreciate how much cooking could actually be a practice. You know, many of them probably had very little experience with cooking. These are Japanese men who went probably directly from families where there were very traditional roles, gender roles, and so the women would have been the ones doing the cooking, to the monastery where, again, the families who supported the monasteries would maybe be offering food, and so the monastics didn't need to cook, but then Dogen and his disciples were up in the mountains where people couldn't reach them, and they needed to do their own cooking. And I will say, you know, for years and years, I thought in this piece, so the Tenzo is the head cook, and Kyokun is the instructions or the directions, basically the advice that Dogen is giving. And for many years, I thought that what Dogen was doing in this particular text, it's one of his most accessible texts. And I thought that what he was doing was that he would bounce back and forth between the mundane aspects of the cooking and the more universal aspects, or some very profound teachings, teachings about absolute reality, actually, that are in here. But more and more, as I experience this piece, what I really think that Dogen is doing is that he is pointing at the fact that both things are happening at the same time. And I'll give you some examples. So if we look at, if you have the text, I'll use the page numbers, and or you have the PDF from the class page. So let's see if I can tell you which parts I'm on. So close to the beginning of the piece, there is a paragraph that starts, "Next, get ready the following morning's breakfast. Select the rice and prepare the vegetables by yourself with your own hands, watching closely with sincere diligence. You should not attend to some things and neglect or be slack with others for even one moment." So there's Dogen saying, even when choosing rice and chopping vegetables, it's important to cultivate this aspect of alignment of attention and awareness. Later on, just a few sentences after that, he says, while examining the rice, watch for sand. While examining the sand, watch for rice. I really enjoy this phrase. So this is meant both literally and figuratively. So there would be maybe small pebbles or bits of sand in the rice. They would have grown it themselves, or it would have come from folks who had grown it themselves. And so you want to clean the rice well before cooking it. But then there's this other piece, while examining the sand, watch for rice, right? So when you see the parts that you think you need to take out, also be careful not to waste rice when you're plucking out the stones or the sand, rinsing out the sand from it. This is actually often understood to mean to also be a metaphor. So The rice is, you could say, knowledge of reality, and the sand is delusion or confusion, or the ways in which we are not clear about reality. But then this next sentence again, if you minutely observe from different viewpoints without absent-mindedness, then naturally the food will integrate with the three virtues and the six tastes. So the three virtues of the food are soft or edible, of a not too harsh a texture, clean, meaning the rice and the uh, sand and stones have been separated, and made in accord with the Dharma, made as a practice. So if you watch carefully, if you observe, if you align the attention with the awareness and drop off the absent-mindedness, then the food will naturally show your care, will naturally taste good. Maybe some of you have had this experience in cooking. Then moving ahead a bit on page 36. So that last quote was toward the top of, beginning at the bottom of page 34 and toward the top of 35. Now continuing on to page 36, at the end of a paragraph that begins with this sentence, it begins with the sentence, after that, put together the materials for tomorrow's lunch. And first, remove with great care all the bugs. And so on. He goes on again to talk about sand and stones. So remember that what Dogen is asking us here is not just to be careful when we make our nourishment, our meals. He's also saying something about maintaining a continuity of attention throughout the day, and the way that that actually has an effect on the things to which we are attending. So definitely avoid the last two sentences of that paragraph. Definitely avoid emotional disputes about the quantity of the ingredients. Why? Because you've received the ingredients from someone else and it's not something you can do anything about. So here Dogen is giving us very practical advice to say, don't fret over things that are outside of your control. Do the best that you can with what you have. And then this lovely phrase, all day and all night, things come to the mind and the mind attends to them. At one with them all, diligently carry on the way. All day and all night, so all the time, even when you're sleeping actually, all the time. Things come to the mind and the mind attends to them. So there's the receptive quality of things coming to the mind. And there is the directive quality of attention. What's happened? What is it that has come to the mind? So the mind attends to them. At one with them all. So this again is referring to, in a very mundane, physical, literal way, the actual impact, the actual interaction that this mind and body is having with the environment, whether it's the inner environment or the outer environment. At one with them all, diligently carry on the way. Be diligent. Keep the continuity of practice. And then moving on to the lower part of page 37. So a couple more paragraphs, 3 more paragraphs later, we have the paragraph that begins, if you are resolute in your intention and are most sincere. You will vow to be more pure-hearted than the ancients and surpass even the elders in attentiveness. Notice that he doesn't say you're going to surpass the elders in being able to turn cartwheels, in being the most scholarly, in being able to walk the furthest to the top of the mountain. No. The intention that he upholds here as worthy of our effort is to surpass even our teachers and our teachers' teachers and the incredibly accomplished and wise ancestors in attentiveness. So then he talks a little bit about, again, doing your best with what you're with the cards that you're dealt, so to speak, or in this case, with the coarse greens instead of the ingredients for creamy soup. He says it's difficult to do this. However, when we attentively undertake this job, so notice over and over again, Dogen reminding us of the need for attention, to be aligned with our activity, with the awareness of events, of objects, of this body and mind. When we attentively undertake this job, and by this job he means the job of being the head cook, but I would propose equally any job, we can definitely surpass the old masters. I should say any job which is wholesome and not harmful. Because things that are harmful actually leave a mark on the mind. We can talk about that another time, perhaps. This principle that when we attentively undertake activity, we can experience the great depths of practice or the great heights of practice, whichever way you like to think about it. This principle is something you don't yet clearly understand, is a certainty, he says, that you still do not yet clearly understand, only because your thinking scatters. Like wild birds, and your emotions scamper around like monkeys in the forest. I love this metaphor. Have you experienced this? Maybe on the cushion, maybe in the rest of your everyday life. Emotions like monkeys scampering around, or thoughts like birds flying off in all directions. So he's talking about a scattered mind, a mind that is dispersed, that is not attentive, that is not focused, that is not intentional or directed in any way. But he says, and this is a very important part, this is where he tells us the how we can begin to cultivate the willingness, the effort, the clarity that will support our ability to bring these two together, the awareness and the attention. How? If those monkeys and birds, if those scattered thoughts themselves, if that scattered mind itself took the backward step of inner illumination. So he refers to this backward step as well in a very famous other writing of his called the Fukan Zazengi, or the universal recommendation for sitting meditation. If those monkeys and birds once took the backward step of inner illumination, naturally you would become integrated. So what does it mean to take a backward step? What does it mean for the mind that is scattered to step back from this engagement, this flurry of activity, mental activity, and illuminate the inner world? Ajahn Brahm, a very, very respected teacher in the Theravada tradition, who has a monastery in Australia and is very supportive of nuns and has written a great many different books. Ajahn Brahm refers to mindfulness and our ability to direct our attention as being like a flashlight. And I think of that when I hear this language from Dogen. Take the backward step of inner illumination. So when we create some spaciousness between the thoughts and the activity and the one that observes, it's all still mind and body. It's all still fully in contact. It's all still, you could say, momentarily integral. Then naturally you would become integrated. That's his next line. So by integrated, I think he means you would see the whole. You become integrated because you're fully there, you're fully involved, you're fully like seeing your daughter's left foot go in. You're fully present for what's there. As part of that condition as well. This is a means, this taking the backward step of illumination, of inner illumination. This is a means whereby, even though you are turned around by things, you can also turn things around. A very important statement. Although you are turned around by things, you can also turn things around. So how is it that you are turned around by things? Well, you are turned around by things in that you have this constant stream of interactivity happening in body and mind. And that stream is creating different impulses in you. So you want to, generally speaking, move away from things that are unpleasant and move toward the things that are pleasant, and ignore the things that are confusing and you can't discern whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. So you're turned around by things, and then there's this sort of mental proliferation that happens, and the Pali word for that is papancha, right? So when the awareness and the attention are not well enough aligned, then something happens in awareness, and there can be a kind of series of thoughts, like the birds scattering, right? Which happen in reaction to something, rather than when the attention and the awareness are aligned, where there's more of a sense of being able to respond. There's more of a sense of presence, and therefore a clarity about the capacity that you have to respond, whether the thing is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And this goes to my basic premise of the class, and I think one of the Buddha's basic premises in the Dhamma, which we'll explore in a little bit more detail as we go along, which is that the quality of attention that we bring, whether our attention is very scattered, or attention is actually even far away, or fuzzy, or we are not, we are resisting the thing that we need to pay attention to. There are many, many different ways that the quality of attention can become very poor. But when the attention is clear and aligned, it's a different experience. So the the when attention and awareness are not so aligned, the likelihood that we are going to get dragged around, we are going to get pushed and pulled by our experience is much higher than if there is a very clear, sharp, focused quality of attention, present, non-judgmental quality of attention that will give us more of a capacity to respond, if for no other reason than because we're more clear about what it is that we're responding to. Thus, although you are turned around by things, you can also turn things around. You can turn your attention around to the basic mechanism that is happening here, to a deeper understanding of the reality, to a responsiveness rather than a reactiveness. So he refers to this as being harmonious and pure in the next line. Being harmonious and pure like this, do not lose either the eye of oneness or the eye that discerns differences, because those two things are happening simultaneously if we are willing to be fully attentive. So the value of aligning attention with awareness, the value of bringing forth a quality of attention that is more engaged, more clear, more responsive, more present, less reactive, less judgmental. All of those kinds of awareness. When we bring this quality of attention, then there is a deepening of discovery. And the whole path is a process of discovery, I propose. The discovery of the principles of reality as they manifest in this human body and mind and in all the world around us. So when we are willing to bring this kind of attentiveness to experience, we'll have this deepening discovery, we'll have a sense of greater intimacy with our lives, with ourselves, with those around us, just like my friend and her daughter. And we'll begin to see quite clearly the non-separation of the inner world and the outer world. Because our bodies and minds are built that way. That's why it's natural that we would become integrated when we do this practice. Because our bodies and minds are built that way. So I hope that we will take this opportunity to begin to understand the aspect of awareness and the aspect of attention and the way in which working with attention will help us discover the Dharma. Changing the world actually from the inside out, changing our experience of the world, but also changing, engaging with the world in a whole different way. One that will show you aspects of your life that you didn't know were even there. Aspects of intimacy that are right there waiting for you to discover them.